Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Sprues. In this inbox review, we'll be taking a close look at Special Hobby's recently reissued 1/72nd scale Boomerang. I'll also be talking a little bit about some of the 3D printed upgrade parts I've designed for this and several other Boomerang kits, which I'll be looking at in future videos. This kit has been very generously funded by fellow model maker Keith, who wanted to see me do some videos on it, and being an Australian, I of course was very keen to do so thanks a lot for this one, mate. So without further ado, let's have a close look at this kit. So, starting out by having a look at the box, on the front here we have a lovely bit of digital kind of looking artwork of two boomerangs flying over the jungle, with a bit of low clouds and some lovely blue sky in the background, which looks really amazing. They're both sort of cruising along with their canopies open, and one pilot appears to be reaching for his throat mic, and I believe they're aircraft of number 5 Squadron, with the front one being A46-126, known as Sinbad 2. We've got a scale in the corner along with Special Hobby's logo, and then the titles here in the corner. On the bottom of the box, we've just got a preview of the schemes included, and it looks like we've got 5 of them, along with some of the 3D printed parts that are supplied in this issue. We've got a kit identification of SH72539, and on the sides of the box, just repeats of the box art, one in red and one in grey. On the top of the box, we have Special Hobby's address and also website links and socials, and I believe a QR code that would take you to their website as well, along with a little warning about the kit containing small and sharp parts, and it's suitable for modelers age 15 and over, and a little thing here saying it was made in the Czech Republic. There's nothing on the back of the box, so we might as well open this one up now. It's a top opener, which is pretty typical for Special Hobbies, and inside we have a lovely set of instructions done in colour, which we'll have a look at in a second, and a single plastic bag which contains everything, although within that we've then got the decals in their own bag to protect them, a small bag here with the 3D printed parts by the looks of things, and the clear parts in their own bag as well. So that's pretty much it in terms of box content, so let's have a look at the instructions and see how this thing goes together and what markings are included. The instructions come in a booklet format and are fully in colour, which is 2 big ticks for me. The front of them features a profile of the aircraft that was on the box, along with the titles. Below that we have a wonderful bit of history talking about not only the Boomerang and its development in itself, but also that of its company, which is the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, known as CAC, or I sometimes like to call them CAC, which I think sounds cool, but I don't think is technically correct. But essentially it came about in the 1930s as the world was getting a little bit more spicy, and there was concerns that if there was a conflict that Australia would not be able to be supplied with aircraft. So we set up our own domestic aircraft production and started off building the Texan or the Harvard with a slight modification to be made out of fabric, which we called the Wirraway. After that, they developed the CA6 Wacket, which was intended for basic training and named after the company's chief designer. In late 1941 and early 1942, however, things got pretty bad for Australia, as not only was most of the Pacific invaded by the Japanese Empire, but they'd also started bombing us, and they were also attempting to take over our territories in New Guinea, and especially Port Moresby, which would mean we'd be cut off from America and the supply route. At that time, Britain was barely letting us have back the aircraft we'd sent overseas to help them out, let alone giving us any of their Spitfires, and there was a lot of concern that we wouldn't be able to get P-40s and P-39s supplied regularly from the Americans. So CAC had been working on an emergency fighter, and within 16 weeks they'd basically designed the Boomerang, which would be the first fighter they ever produced. It has a lot of similarities with the Wirraway, and I believe a lot of components as well, like the tail units and parts of the landing gear and wings, and the engines were 1830s, which we'd been producing for our Bristol Beauforts that we were producing under license down in Victoria. The aircraft CAC came up with was very manoeuvrable, reliable, and quite durable. However, it was terribly slow. Fortunately, in the end, we were able to continually receive P-40s from the Americans, and eventually we did get Spitfires. In the end, the Boomerang never even got an aerial kill. However, its maneuverability and durability meant it was very famously used as a reconnaissance and sort of target locating aircraft in the jungles of New Guinea and Bougainville, where it sort of worked alongside RAAF Kitty Hawks and the Royal New Zealand Air Force Corsairs to mark targets for them, which they would then go in and bomb and strafe. It was also used as a trainer, and we ended up producing around about 300, so it wasn't a total failure. It served several roles pretty well, and it was a bit of a technological achievement for us, being the first fighter that we produced domestically, and I think for a first attempt it honestly turned out really quite good. So all of that history is covered in this section of the instructions, which is fantastic, along with some of the aircraft's technical data. Opening up, we then have our sprue map here, which shows our single sprue and the parts we'll be using, along with the clear sprue here and the 3D printed ones. Just to the right of that, we've then got our color codes here, which are called out in Gunzi or Gunzi. And then below that, we've got our various keys and symbols for the different things we may have to do during assembly. As is typical for a aircraft kit, assembly starts with the interior, and it looks like there's quite a lot of fiddly bits and sub-assemblies that have to be assembled. The Boomerang is famous for having a tubular construction for its sort of cockpit internal framework, which is basically copied over from the Wirraway. So we've got quite a lot of small parts that need to be added. We've got a front bulkhead here with various parts for the sort of flooring area where the rudder pedals go, along with the instrument panel. And even the instrument panel itself consists of various sub-assemblies which have to be built. We've then got a resin seat for the pilot with some of the framework and seat belts molded to it, along with the control column. A little base piece for the control column, which gets fitted to the floor along with the seat. The rudder pedals, which also have the little compass, which would get attached to the frameworks of them. A fair bit of the internal framework, which also have these extra parts which have to be placed on top of them. And they then get attached to the framework, which then gets attached to this floor piece. There's also the throttle and some other little controls which get attached to the side walls here. Once you've done that, you can then start assembling the engine. So it looks like the engine comes in two halves for each row of cylinders, with the rear one having part of the bulkhead there. A bit of wiring, it looks like it's included, but I'm not sure what that's made out of. Oh yeah, scratch built. So that symbol indicates that obviously you've got to find the ignition wiring yourself. And then we've got the gearbox or sort of crankshaft cover that goes on the front there. Then going back to the interior, we've also got some, I believe, like fuse boxes and radio equipment that goes on the sidewalls here. And once that's been added and painted up, you can then add the internal framework. It looks like there's also a rear panel here, which gets added in last, along with the sort of armored backrest for the pilot or headrest. The engine can get installed as well, and once you've also added the small accessory parts to the left side fuselage, you can then join the two halves together. So it's nice to see they've gone into a lot of detail, and it's kind of cool that you get to see how the internal framework of the aircraft comes together, although it's obviously going to be very fiddly, and some of these parts are going to be really small. Turning over the page, we've then got the wing assembly, which consists of basically adding the two upper halves to a lower part, as well as this sort of internal framework, which gets added for behind the wheel wells. The landing gear comes in two parts. It looks like we've got the main strut and the tyres, although there'll be a few landing gear covers that we add as well. Once you've assembled the wings, you can then join them to the fuselage and add the horizontal stabilizers to the rear, and there's also the small air intake for, I think, the oil cooling radiator at the top of the engine. Then for step 7, we're adding the landing gear struts along with the landing gear bay doors, what looks like a rear light or perhaps a camera access area for a reconnaissance version, and it looks like we've got a tail wheel and also the option to add a drop tank under the belly. There appears to be a little bit of scratch building of some kind going on with the exhaust area, and we've got two different options for exhausts, either just the straight simple pipe or a more complicated flame dampener one to sort of hide any exhaust flames. Then for step 8, we add the canopy section, which also has these little, I think, resin sort of D-shaped panels that cover the rear radio compartment of the rear windows, so that gives a little bit of visibility for the pilots to the rear. And then we've got smaller accessories to add, such as the pitot tube and the two 20mm cannons. And finally, we've then got the propeller assembly, which consists of a base piece, a prop blade set, and the front of the spinner. I don't think there's any way to actually attach that to the engine, as it doesn't look like there's any sort of shaft to go into the gearbox. But perhaps that's just not illustrated in the instructions. So that's it for assembly. The rest of the instructions are our marking guides, and we've got quite a nice selection of schemes to go with. The first one is the aircraft featured on the box art, which is A46-126 of number 5 Squadron, and it's from May 1944, based in Mareeba, Queensland. It talks a bit about the history of not only the pilot but also the aircraft here, and it mentions it was written off in a takeoff accident when a tyre burst in July of 1944. So it's great that it goes into the history about the aircraft and the pilots. I really love when instructions do that. And our marking guides, like the rest of the instructions, are in colour, which is fantastic. It mentions this scheme is done in foliage green and earth brown with sky blue undersides, and then a sort of lighter green for the spinner. I think some boomerangs may have been painted in RAF sort of equivalent colours, which were a little bit lighter, but I could be mistaken. If you're an expert on Australian Air Force colours during World War II, definitely chime in the comments section. But we sort of ended up mixing up our own local batches of those colours as well, and foliage green is quite a famous example. And speaking of which, the second aircraft is entirely painted in foliage green with no underside lighter colour or camouflage pattern, and this is A46-121 of Number 4 Squadron, based in Gloucester Strip in New Guinea in early 1944. Again, it's got the history of not only the aircraft but also the pilot that was flying it at the time, and mentions that on the 28th of March in 1944, this aircraft actually crashed when it returned from a reconnaissance mission on landing. The pilot was uninjured, but apparently he was later killed in May of 1944 flying another Boomerang. Turning over the page, we've got another aircraft done in foliage green with earth brown and sky blue, and this one is from Number 84 Squadron, based in Horn Island. It mentions this aircraft had an engine failure while it was on a mission, and the aircraft was force landed in Princess Charlotte Bay in October of 1943, and though the pilot was rescued, the aircraft was left there, though it was eventually discovered in the 1970s. The force scheme included is another foliage green, brown and sky blue aircraft from Number 83 Squadron, and it's A46-144, which was based at RAAF Amberley in 1945, which is actually pretty close to where I live. And finally, for the fifth scheme, we have an aircraft from Number 85 Squadron, based in Guildford Air Force Base in Western Australia in August 1944. And unlike the other aircraft, it's just got a single letter rather than the sort of two-letter code, and it's A46-167. At the very back of the instructions, we've got our universal stencil placement, which shows where all of the common markings go. So it's great they've gone into that level of detail for this kit, and that they've kept the placement guide separate, because it would be very messy if it was also included with the camouflage schemes. The very back of the instructions has some promotional stuff showing Special Hobbies' other kits. So that's pretty much it for the instructions, which are pretty nicely laid out, and again, fantastic that they're in a booklet form, have a lot of detail, and are done in colour. Taking a look at the plastic parts, as mentioned, everything comes in this one bag, which I'll open up now. Taking a look at the single large dark grey sprues that we have here, we've got in the bottom corner here the left side fuselage and horizontal stabiliser, and as you can see, they've done a pretty nice job doing all of the details on the aircraft. They've done recessed panel lines with a few little recessed rivet details and access hatches and things like the grab handle, which look fantastic, and they've done a really nice job doing that sort of subtle fabric texturing on the rudders there. I believe the rear part of the aircraft from about here onwards is made out of wood, but the rest is all metal, which looks pretty good. There's a few little bits of flash that will need to be cleaned up, but otherwise it's okay. On the inside of the fuselage, we've got a bit of internal sort of framework molded to the sides there, which is good. And the horizontal stabilizers are pretty similar. There's some recessed panel lines and some nice fabric detailing. Some of the panel lines are a little bit interrupted, so they're going to need a bit of a cleanup. So I'd recommend definitely running a scriber along them just to make them a little bit neater. But otherwise, pretty nice molding there. We've got a lot of parts on the sprue, so we've got our propeller blades here, which look pretty good, with only a little bit of flash on the corners. The base piece of the propeller and the spinner itself. Again, there doesn't appear to be much of a shaft. There's sort of just a small bulge on the back of the prop blade there, so I don't think there's really any way to actually attach it to the engine, which is a bit of a shame. We've got some small interior parts here, like I think this is our fuse box and the radios, as well as some side panels for the main instrument panel. So the details aren't too bad. They're a little bit soft compared to perhaps 3D printing, which I'll talk about a bit later. But it's pretty nice that they've had a go at it and that it's included in the plastic. We've got our front bulkhead here, which separates the cockpit from the engine area, with a little bit of detailing at the front there for some of the sort of structure and various engine accessories that would have been attached to that wall. But it is reasonably basic. Next to that, I believe we've got our rear bulkhead for the cockpit area with some of the framework that the rear seat attaches to. Above that, we've got our internal detailing for the wheel well that sort of goes on the back wall here, and it looks really quite good. They've done raised panel lines for all of the ribbing, and then they've even recessed in some rivet details, which is pretty good. We've got some of the framework here for inside of the cockpit, which is going to be very tricky to sort of remove from the sprue without breaking, I reckon. So yeah, probably best to use a knife rather than side cutters, just to be a little bit more gentle. There is a little bit of flash on these parts, which is going to be a bit tricky to clean up, but generally they're okay. Next to the prop assembly stuff, we've got even more internal parts for the main instrument panel, along with our pitot tube here and some more internal framework. Next to that, we've then got our plastic molded cannon barrels, although I believe we are supplied with resin ones, which might be a bit better. A few more bits of internal framework, and I think the sort of floor pan areas for where the rudder pedals go. The landing gear here with the main strut, and some very nicely done wheels there. They've done the sort of wheel hub cover that was on a lot of earlier Boomerangs, although I think some later ones also had sort of hollowed out ones that looked a little bit like the Mustang. There is a bit of a nasty seam line on the wheels and no sort of tread pattern there, but they're still pretty decent. We've got the other fuselage sidewall framework there. Some more small accessories, including our tail wheel, the other rudder pedal floor piece, and the other cannon barrel, which oddly enough is a lot more cleanly molded on this one. We've got more bits of the landing gear, and I'm not too sure what this part is. Perhaps some sort of shock absorber or part of the landing gear. Next to that, we've got our main instrument panel, which doesn't have any sort of gauge details, which they've sort of, I think, attempted on some of these parts. Instead, it's just got recessed holes for where the gauges are and some slight raised bumps for the different panels. The rudders don't look too bad there with the framework that's at the top of them there. Our engines are pretty decently done with some nice recessed details on all of the cylinder heads, although as mentioned in the instructions, for any wiring you're going to have to scratch build that yourself. We've got the crankshaft cover here, which looks pretty good with the sort of raised ribbing details on it. Next to that, we've got the seat, a rear bulkhead or sort of armoured part here with the headrest, and what looks like some more internal framework. I think possibly the part that the main instrument panel attaches to. And then we've got our landing gear bay doors on either side of the lower wings here, which don't really have any detail on them. The right side fuselage, which looks pretty good. Unlike the left side, we've got the exhaust area, which sort of sticks out, and they've sort of done a recessed area where you can attach, I think, either the resin or the plastic ones we've got. It's a little bit cleaner molded than the other side, which had a bit of flash on the rudder, but on this one we've not really got any. Again, inside there's a bit of internal framework and a few sort of ridges to help line up some of the internal parts. Horizontal stabilizer on this side also seems to be a little bit cleaner molded than the other one. Below that, we've got our belly tank, which doesn't really have any details on it, but I think that's pretty accurate. We've got a sort of floor piece included for the cockpit, but I'm not really certain if that's 100% accurate. I think that the Boomerang is pretty much like the Wearaway and didn't really have a floor, so to speak. Rather, everything was attached to the frames, but I can understand why they would do that, as you're not probably going to notice it too much at the bottom of everything, and it means there's something to sort of attach the cockpit to before installing it into the fuselage. As mentioned, we've got an exhaust here, which is the sort of basic earlier style, which is just a, just an exhaust without any flame dampening. We've got the little intake that goes on the top of the engine cowling there. And finally, either side of the sort of smaller bits that we've got our wings. So again, the lower and upper half have recessed panel lines with some nice fabric texturing on the ailerons there. They've done a really nice job doing the sort of raised sort of structural elements on the wings, the raised bulges for the cannons, and they've done these little raised bumps for, I think, the nav lights. I don't know if they've actually done the formation lights, which I think should be on the underside of the wings just here, but that's reasonably easy to add yourself, I suppose. But they have done a very nice job with these access hatches and drilling out the holes here for the cannon and machine gun ammunition chutes. They're a little bit rougher on the left, so they're going to need a little bit of cleanup, I reckon, but they're not too bad on the right. And the upper surface wing parts also look pretty decent. There are a few perhaps slight imperfections with the ailerons fabric texturing, and again the panel lines in some spots are a little bit soft, but generally they look pretty good. Inside of the upper surface of the wings, there isn't any internal detailing for the wheel well area, but there is a small sort of bump here with a hole to help attach the landing gear, so they'll be reasonably solid. So for the most part, there's some really fantastic details, and they've done a really great job doing the surface detailing on the fuselage and wings. There are a few spots where the sprues aren't super clean with a bit of flash that's going to require some cleanup, but there's plenty of guide pins to help line parts up, especially on the floor and inside of the fuselage, so it should be a reasonably good assembly as long as you clean everything up. The clear parts come supplied in their own little bag here to protect them from getting scratched, which is fantastic. And the main one we'll be using is, of course, our canopy here, and there's also some small lights and like a sort of window, which I think may be for the reconnaissance version. So the canopy is quite curved on the Boomerang, so it's pretty hard to avoid any distortions, but I think they've done a reasonably good job sort of looking at my finger through there. It's a bit of a shame it comes as a single piece and you don't have the option to have it open, as a lot of the time, even when in flight, you'd have the canopy open as it was pretty hot in the Pacific. And it would be great, since we've got all that nice cockpit detail, to be able to open things up and have a closer look. But oh well, I'll definitely be vacuuming my own canopies for this kit, so I can do that. And should you wish to do so as well, there are aftermarket ones available. But generally the quality is still pretty good on these ones despite the curves. They're not too thick and there doesn't appear to be too many scratches or any real imperfections, just a bit of distortion from the curves. In this latest release we're also supplied with some 3D printed parts, which I believe is a new feature for the Special Hobby Boomerang. But as you can see, we've got a fantastic seat there with some really lovely seatbelt details molded into it, and also the framework at the back there, so that looks really great. We've got resin printed rear sort of canopy covers there for where the radio compartment is. The exhausts, which are a little bit hard to see there, but not too badly done. I really love those little cannons that we've got in the middle there with the sort of fabric covers that were put on a lot of the guns. There is a little bit of a compass there in the middle, and I think possibly the gun sight or some other small piece in the middle. There's some other little bits there which I think are sort of railings that go on the internal framework. And we've also got our headrest there, and I think a control column, yep, just to the right here. And it's good that they are sort of protected in this frame. Looks like they've done a really nice job with these ones, and they'll add a fantastic bit of detail. I'd say there's a really fantastic chance I'll use at least the seat and the cannon barrels, although I may actually end up 3D printing a lot of the other bits, which I'll talk about after we've had a look at the decals. The decals come in the same bag as the sprues, but they have their own bag to protect them, which is good. So we'll open that one up. So as you can see, we've got a ton of common stencils, and I'll zoom the camera in so you can read them a little bit more. For the most part, it looks like most of the writing is readable. It's a little bit easier for some of these larger ones, but I think you can sort of vaguely make out some of these smaller markings and features like the little Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation logo on the tail. There is quite a noticeable thick film of glossy sort of material on all of the decals, where you can see that they've sort of sealed them in, I guess. And some of the colours, like especially on the roundels here, look a little bit patchy with some sort of white marks. So not terrible, they still look like pretty good decal, although perhaps you may want to spray on the roundels if you want it to be more pristine, as I think these might end up looking a tiny bit faded and patchy. I haven't used any decals from any other Special Hobby kits just yet, so I'm not sure how they're going to go. It looks like they might be a bit thick, but hopefully between a bit of decal softener and adhesive they'll be okay, and once a bit of matte varnish is applied, that glossy sort of thick texture will disappear and it will blend in nicely. For a while now, I've been working on my own upgrade set of 3D printed parts for the Boomerang, which include things like the engine, landing gear bay, internal details, and also some small external ones. So there's a good chance I'll be putting them into the Special Hobby kit, although I did design them originally for upgrading the Airfix and Tasman models, which we'll also be having a look at in another video. So I've done the landing gear as a single assembly here. Initially I did it with the landing gear bay doors attached to the wheels to give them a little bit more strength, but that makes it too hard to sort of paint the details, so now I've sort of done them as a separate piece with a little sort of circular recess to help line them up with the landing gear struts and wheels. The wheels I've got a few different options for, so that you'll be able to print them out and switch to whichever one you want. So we've got the earlier sort of style here, like what's included in the kit with the sort of square tire treads, although I've also got a flat tire tread, just a sort of small ridge one, which you see with a different set of tires there, and also a later sort of diamond style one. I've also done wheel hubs that are sort of like the P51, which I think you see on quite a few restored Boomerangs, and also this style, which I think was featured on the Wirraway. Comparing them to the Special Hobbies plastic parts, it looks like the wheels are pretty similar in size. It's a little bit difficult to tell with the struts there. I think my resin ones are slightly shorter, but these ones are supposed to sink a little bit into the wheel wells, so if you include the wheel well details there, it looks like they're Yeah, still a little bit shorter. For the engines, I've already done my own 1830s, which I have available, but I've modified them to add the famous exhausts on, and I found it's easier to sort of print them as a single piece, although I may also do a version that's separated, so you don't have to thin down and remove a lot of plastic to fit them. But basically, there's a nice bit of cylinder detail as well as wiring, which is much improved over the Special Hobby Kits one. Although I have noticed the crankshafts I've got are a little bit different. I've designed a propeller which seems to be a little bit anemic compared to the kit ones, so I might have to scale up the blades a little bit. But they fit pretty nicely into these engines here, if I just sort of put it in. There's a few little supports inside the gearbox, but they're only small, so I'll be able to, yeah, there we go, push the propeller in there, and it will fit nicely and rotate still. The cockpit's been a particular challenge, and I'm still sort of ironing out the kinks. Initially, I sort of wanted to do it as a single piece, but as you can see, that led to a lot of parts not being able to be supported, because it's just impossible to get the supports through the middle of the framework there. So I have started to sort of split it up into sections, where you can see we've got a sort of middle section and then a top section there. But I've managed to get a bit more extra detail in with the rudder pedals sort of molded into this assembly, along with the little compass in the middle, and then all of your little engine controls, the trim wheels, and some other small hand pump sort of things there. I think that's like a fuel cutoff selector that's just in the sidewall here. And then these sort of pipe things, which I think may be for controlling fuel again, or possibly some sort of other fluid. I've sort of designed the control columns linkages into the floor there, along with the sort of S-shaped vent that comes from through the engine bay there. The control column itself I've done as a separate piece, which will fit into that hole you can see there. So I think I'm possibly going to try and separate the front bulkhead as well, and then that sort of gets attached onto the framework there. I'll just see how it goes printing, but that's definitely a lot easier to paint than when it's a single piece, and also easier to print. I've also done a fair bit of detailing for inside the engine area, just because a bit of that will actually be visible through the wheel wells, because this piece sort of fits there, and then you'll end up seeing a little bit of that through them. But that basically includes a bit of the fuel, or I think the oil tank at the top here, some of the rear bulkhead details, which I think might be like batteries and that sort of thing, a little bit of rear detail for the engine, and then some of the wiring there. I've done the framework as well for the engine, and as you can see, it fits quite nicely, with even the front bulkhead having that little gap there that the exhaust would sort of pass through. Another part I've had a bit of trouble with is the rear sort of armoured plate with the headrest. I think originally it sort of was attached to the floor there, but there was, as you can see, a lot of issues and the part wouldn't form properly. When I did it separately like this, I ended up needing a lot of little supports to actually attach it, because it floats a little bit. So I think I might try and rearrange it so it's actually attached to the top sort of rear framework piece here. We've got also a small pitot tube here. Other small accessories along with the control column include some cannon barrels, which actually have a slight hole in them. Although my version isn't covered, it's just the barrel, so I might also do a version that has the sort of fabric covering on them. We've got a gun sight that I've designed as well, which sort of slots into the main instrument panel, which we'll have a look at in a second. And as well as the main instrument panel, I've also done a separate part here with the various engine controls, so your mixture, propeller, and throttle, which are pretty solid. And then I've also done the sidewall parts here with the radio controls. I think that's the fuse box, and then the various wires are sort of attached to them. So that will sort of go on the sidewall. I think mine might be slightly sharper than the kit ones, if I can find them. Oh yeah, here we go. So yeah, probably quite similar, I would say, but I've also done the wiring, so I think I might end up using these. And for the instrument panel, because it's obviously a bit hard to get details for gauges without photo etch or decals, I've sort of designed them as raised and recessed details. So theoretically, if you dry brush that, you'll get all of your instrument gauge details, and there's also all of the little engine controls and a bit of the framework. I've also tried to model the rear part of the gauges, which sort of stick out of the instrument panel. It's a bit clearer to see from this part here, which I've removed from the supports there, with all of the rear part of the gauges molded. My seat's definitely not as detailed. I've sort of done the perforations in the straps on the seatbelt, but I haven't done some of the extra detailing, and especially the rear part there with the framework. I didn't really bother because I thought it would be largely hidden anyways, but maybe I'll still add a little bit. And I might also spice up the sort of lap belt there because mine are a little bit basic. So once I'm sort of happy with these Boomerang parts, I'll be releasing them on my Cults page like all of the other STL files I've designed and printed for my builds. And hopefully not only will they add a bit of extra detail to the Special Hobby kit, as mentioned, they'll also be used in my planned builds of the Airfix and the old limited run Tasman model. So that wraps up my look at the Special Hobby re-release of the CAC Boomerang from 2026. So overall, a pretty nice looking kit with some very decent detailing, a little bit of flash and some slightly less cleanly molded recessed panel lines than some other brands, but still very good, and a great selection of markings, some nice looking 3D printed parts, and some very good clear instructions. As of the making of this video, I've started to see it appear in some online Australian hobby shops for around about 30 AUD, which I'd say isn't too bad. I believe this is its 4th release, with the first one being originally in 2011, and they've covered sort of slightly different themes with particularly the later models and the earlier ones in certain boxings, but this one's got a pretty good coverage of some of the middle sort of war ones. So myself, and I'm sure many other Australian model makers, are happy to have the Special Hobby 72nd scale Boomerang back on the shelves of hobby shops, and this is probably one of the best models that you can get of this particular aircraft in this scale. I'm looking forward to having a build of it, and upgrading it with some of my own 3D printed parts to see how it goes, and also comparing it to the offerings from Tasman and Airfix, although I'm pretty confident in saying that the Special Hobby is definitely a mark above both of them in terms of both interior and external detailing, and is going to be a fantastic kit to build. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss any future videos. Once again, a big thank you to Keith for funding this kit, and also a massive thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help support my channel and keep things running. Over the next couple weeks, I'll be doing some inbox reviews of the Tasman and Airfix Boomerangs, and all going well, I'll have a build video coming out in the next few months on this one as soon as I've finished working on the 3D printed parts for it. Otherwise though, that's it for now, but until the next video, as always, take care and model on.